How could you bring this disgrace upon us? I can't do this anymore.
I just can't.
The air in the room was thick and heavy, saturated with the primal scent of blood and sweat. It clung to the back of the throat, a metallic taste of effort and life. A single, guttering oil lamp cast a feeble, dancing light, its flame struggling against the oppressive darkness that pressed in from the corners of the small, windowless chamber. This was not a place of joy, but an arena. On the low, rope-webbed cot, Anya lay spent, her body a landscape of exhaustion. Her dark hair was plastered to her scalp and temples, a wet, tangled mess. Every muscle, stretched and strained to its limit, now felt like liquid lead. The final, searing wave of pain had just receded, leaving behind a trembling, hollowed-out stillness. Her chest heaved, drawing in ragged breaths that hitched in her raw throat. In the quiet aftermath, a fragile hope, a tiny, desperate flame, began to kindle in her heart. Maybe this time, he will be pleased. The old village midwife, Saroj, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by decades of such moments, worked with quiet efficiency. Her hands, gnarled but capable, moved between Anya's splayed legs. And then, a sound. A thin, reedy, indignant cry that sliced through the thick air. A new life, protesting its rude arrival. Saroj's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. Her experienced eyes, which had seen the first breath of countless babies, saw what Anya, in her hopeful haze, could not. She saw the delicate configuration of the tiny, blood-smeared body. A profound weariness, deeper than physical fatigue, settled in the old woman's bones. She cleaned the infant quickly, swaddling her in a clean, though frayed, white cloth, masking the telltale sign. She turned to Anya, her movements slow, deliberate. The hope in Anya's eyes was a physical thing, a luminous, fragile bubble. It made what Saroj had to do feel like a crime. "My daughter." Anya whispered, her voice a dry rustle. The word daughter was a question, a plea for it not to be true. Saroj's eyes, full of a deep, ancient sorrow, met hers. She leaned in close, the smell of herbs and old age on her skin. She placed the swaddled bundle into the crook of Anya's arm. The baby had stopped crying, her tiny face puckered and serene in the lamplight. She was beautiful. "It's a girl," Saroj whispered, the words not a statement, but a lament, a eulogy for the peace that was about to shatter. The pity in her voice was a cold weight, pressing down on Anya's chest, crushing that fragile bubble of hope into nothingness. Anya's arms instinctively tightened around her daughter. A fresh, different kind of tear, born not of physical pain but of a soul-deep dread, welled in her eyes. She looked down at the perfect little face, the dark, damp wisps of hair, the miniature fingers that curled around nothing. "My little one," she breathed, her voice breaking. "My fifth girl." The door to the room, which had been left ajar, creaked as it was pushed fully open. The silhouette that filled the frame was not one of anxious expectancy, but of grim judgment. Devi stood there, a tall, austere figure whose very presence seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Her sharp eyes, like chips of flint, bypassed her daughter-in-law entirely and fixed on the bundle in her arms. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. "Well." Devi's voice was a low crack, like ice breaking underfoot. "Is it a boy? Has my son finally been blessed with an heir?" Saroj bowed her head, unable to speak. It was the tiny, mewling sound from the baby that answered. A soft, feminine sound. Devi's face, usually a mask of controlled severity, underwent a terrifying transformation. It wasn't just anger. It was a volcanic eruption of pure, unadulterated fury. Her lips peeled back from her teeth in a silent snarl. The lines on her face deepened into canyons of rage and disgust. The dream of a grandson, a legacy, a name to carry forward, shattered. Again. And by her. This weak, useless vessel of a woman. She crossed the room in 3 swift, furious strides. The air seemed to crackle around her. "Give it to me," she commanded, her voice trembling with venom. Anya, terror giving her a surge of strength, clutched her baby closer, curling her battered body around the tiny life. "No, please, Ma, she is your granddaughter." Granddaughter. Devi spat the word as if it were poison. "I have a garden full of worthless weeds. I need an oak tree." With a strength that belied her age, Devi's hand, hard as iron, shot out. She didn't reach for the baby gently. She didn't coo or smile. Her fingers, cold and rough, dug into the swaddling cloth, and she snatched the newborn from Anya's protective embrace. The baby, disturbed from her warmth and safety, let out a sharp, startled cry. Devi held the child away from her body, not cradling her, but examining her as one would a piece of rotten fruit. Her eyes, blazing with contempt, scanned the tiny, flailing form. "Look at it," she hissed. "Another mouth to feed. Another dowry to pay. Another failure." Her gaze then lifted from the baby and slammed into the figure still hovering in the doorway. "Rohan, look. Look at what your wife has given you. Another piece of trash." And Rohan, Anya's husband, the man who had once whispered promises of love under a monsoon sky, stood there. His broad shoulders, which had once felt like a shelter to Anya, were slumped. He was a man caught in a vice, squeezed between the wife he had chosen and the mother who had forged him. His eyes, dark and shadowed, lifted from the floor. They did not meet Anya's pleading, tear-filled gaze. They did not soften at the sight of his newborn daughter. They flickered to the child in his mother's arms, a tiny, mewling symbol of his own perceived inadequacy, his failure to produce a son, and then away. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Shame burned hot in his gut, shame for the baby, shame for his wife. But most of all, a corrosive, selfish shame for himself. This was her fault. It had to be. And then, his shame curdled into something darker, something easier to wield: anger. A hot, righteous anger directed at the one who had caused this humiliation. His eyes, finally, found Anya's. But there was no love there. No shared pain. Only a cold, hard accusation. In that single look, as Devi contemptuously thrust the swaddled baby back into Saroj's arms, Anya felt the last vestiges of her world crumble. The physical pain was nothing. This was the true whip, the final, devastating blow. Her daughter was here, but her husband was gone. And in the furious, triumphant eyes of her mother-in-law, she saw the beginning of a new kind of hell. The air, already thick with the scent of blood and betrayal, now turned to iron. It was no longer just a room. It was a crucible, and Anya was the metal about to be shattered. Devi's arm, having thrust the swaddled baby back into the midwife's arms as if handing off a piece of soiled laundry, did not still. It moved with a dreadful, practiced purpose. Her eyes, still locked on Anya's cowering form, swept the room and found what they sought. Hanging from a rusty nail on the wall, next to Rohan's worn-work clothes, was a thick leather belt, its buckle a tarnished, malevolent eye. The sound of the belt being pulled from its loop was a dry, scraping rasp that seemed to suck all other sound from the world. It was the cocking of a gun in the silence before an execution. Anya's breath hitched. The primal fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach now exploded, flooding her veins with ice. "No. Ma, please. I beg you." Her voice was a thin, broken thing, lost in the vast, dark cruelty of the moment. Devi ignored her. She turned the stiff, heavy leather over in her hands, testing its weight. Her voice was low, a venomous whisper that carried more threat than any scream. 5 times. 5 times you have failed this family. 5 times you have spat on my son's legacy. This weakness must be beaten out of you. Her gaze then sliced toward the doorway, to her son, who stood as if turned to stone. Rohan. The name was a crack of a whip itself. Rohan flinched. His face was a pale, sickly mask in the lamplight. He looked at his mother, a figure of towering, terrifying authority. He looked at Anya, his wife, her eyes wide with animal terror, her body still glistening with the sweat of childbirth. He saw the old midwife, Saroj, clutching the newborn, her face averted in shame and powerlessness. "Hold her," Devi commanded, her tone leaving no room for debate. It was not a request. It was an order, a test of his loyalty, his manhood. A war raged in Rohan's eyes for a fleeting second, a ghost of the man he might have been, a memory of the woman he once loved. But the ghost was weak, and the memory was faint, drowned out by a lifetime of submission to the tyrant in the room. The shame of his failure, the need to align himself with the power, won. His jaw tightened. He gave a single, stiff nod. He moved towards the cot. His footsteps were heavy, leaden. He did not look at Anya's face. He looked at her shoulders, her arms, as if she were a task to be completed. As he approached, Anya's pleading eyes searched his, desperately trying to find some remnant of the man she married. "Rohan. No. Our daughter. Please." He said nothing. His hands, the hands that had once stroked her hair, now closed around her upper arms. His grip was not passionate, not even particularly angry. It was efficient, cold, and crushingly strong. He pinned her to the cot, his weight bearing down, flattening her exhausted body against the rough, damp mattress. Anya struggled for a moment, a futile, weak thrashing. But her strength was gone, siphoned away by birth and despair. All she could do was turn her head and see Devi advancing, the belt folded in half, the leather gripped tight in her fist. "Please," Anya sobbed, the word dissolving into a whimper. The first blow came without warning. It was not the sharp crack of a whip on air, but a thick, sickening thwack as the hard leather connected with the tender flesh of her back. The pain was immediate and blinding, a white-hot brand that seared through the days of her exhaustion. A choked scream was torn from her throat, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. The newborn in Saroj's arms, startled by the noise, began to wail in earnest, a high, desperate counterpoint to her mother's cries. Devi's face was a rigid mask of concentration and grim satisfaction. She raised the belt again. Thwack. This one landed lower, across her thighs. Anya arched against the cot, her body trying to escape the pain, but Rohan's weight held her fast. His face was turned away, his eyes squeezed shut, but his hands did not relent. He was an anchor, holding her in place for the storm. Thwack. Tears streamed down Anya's face, mingling with the sweat on the mattress. The world narrowed to the symphony of pain, the whistle of the belt cutting the air, the brutal impact, the searing fire that bloomed on her skin, and the frantic, terrified cries of her newborn daughter. But then, something shifted in her. A deeper, more powerful instinct than self-preservation took over. Motherhood. As Devi raised the belt for a fourth blow, Anya, with a superhuman effort born of pure love, stopped trying to escape. Instead, she curled her body. She fought against Rohan's grip, not to break free, but to turn, to twist. She drew her knees up, hunching her shoulders, making her back a wider, more concave target. She was moving into the path of the blows, not away. She was creating a hollow, a protective cage of her own broken body. Her arms, still pinned by Rohan, strained, and she managed to shift just enough to tuck her head down. Her entire being was now focused on one thing, shielding the tiny, wailing life that was just feet away. Every flinch, every contraction of her muscles, was a deliberate act of protection. The blows kept falling, on her shoulders, her back, the backs of her legs, but she absorbed them, her sobs now silent, her face a rictus of pain and fierce, unyielding love. The memory of the riverbank kiss, once a sacred treasure, now felt like a taunt from a past life. As the belt fell again, Anya's mind, reeling from the shock, did not just recall the beautiful beginning. It forced her to relive the brutal, step-by-step unraveling. It was a descent charted not in years, but in the births of her daughters, each one marking a deeper circle of hell. Priya, the first daughter, the chilling shadow. The first fracture came with Priya. The memory superimposed itself over the present beating, a ghostly echo of a first, fundamental betrayal. The room after Priya's birth was warm, filled with the gentle afternoon sun. Anya, exhausted but radiant, held her firstborn. The tiny, perfect face, the little fingers, it was a miracle she had created. She looked up, seeking her husband's eyes, desperate to share this awe. Rohan stood by the door, a bouquet of wilting flowers in his hand. He was smiling, but it was a fragile, uncertain thing that didn't reach his eyes. "A daughter," he said, the words hanging in the air. And then Devi entered. She did not look at the baby. Her gaze went straight to her son, and she placed a firm, possessive hand on his shoulder. "A daughter is a responsibility," she corrected, her voice slicing through the tender moment. "A long, expensive responsibility. But, next time." Anya saw the change in Rohan's face instantly. The flicker of paternal joy was extinguished, replaced by a son's need for approval. He nodded slowly, his eyes dropping from Anya's. The abuse began not with physical violence, but with a slow, psychological suffocation. Devi's voice became the constant soundtrack of her life, a drip of acid. "Your milk is weak. Is that why she cries so much? You cannot even do this right. Look at you, still so fat. How will you attract my son like this? You walk as if you carry the world's weight. Do you think your work is harder than his?" Rohan began to recede. The man who dreamed of jasmine gardens now ate his meals in sullen silence, his mother's words his only scripture. Anya was banished from the dinner table, told her place was to eat after the family had finished, her meals often reduced to cold scraps. The shared dreams in his eyes were replaced by a vague, growing resentment. The fortress he promised was already showing cracks, and it was Anya, not some external enemy, who was being treated as the siege weapon against it. Maya, the second daughter, the first break in the skin. The memory of Maya's birth was darker. The room felt colder. When the midwife announced, "Another beautiful girl," Devi did not even bother with words. She let out a sharp, disgusted hiss, like steam from a pressure cooker, and turned on her heel, leaving the room. This time, Rohan didn't have a bouquet. He didn't have a smile. He looked at Anya, and for the first time, she saw not disappointment, but accusation. Then he followed his mother out. The shift was immediate and tangible. A week later, Anya was still bleeding, her body a hollowed-out vessel of pain. She was carrying a heavy brass pot of water from the well, her arms trembling with weakness. Dizziness washed over her, and she stumbled. Icy water sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the veranda floor, a few drops landing on Devi's spotless, white sari. Time froze. Devi looked down at the droplets as if they were specks of poison. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Useless," she whispered, the word carrying more menace than a shout. "Clumsy. You cannot give me a grandson, and you cannot even perform the simplest task without failing." Before Anya could stammer an apology, Devi's hand, hard as teak, flashed through the air. Crack. The sound of the slap was shockingly loud. It wasn't just the pain, a stinging, hot bloom across her cheekbone that brought immediate tears to her eyes. It was the shock, the utter violation of it. Her own mother had never struck her. This was the first time anyone had ever raised a hand to her. Instinctively, her eyes, wide with pain and disbelief, flew to the doorway. Rohan was there, watching. Their eyes met. For a single, heart-stopping moment, she saw his shock, a glimpse of the man from the river. But then, his gaze faltered. He looked down at his feet, then turned and walked away. His retreat was a permission slip. His silence was a collaboration. The sacred boundary of her body had been violently crossed, and the one person sworn to protect her had sanctioned it. The verbal degradation now had a physical punctuation. The slaps became a regular occurrence, a quick, sharp punishment for any perceived fault, a dusty corner, a slightly undersalted dish, a cry from one of the children that disturbed Devi's nap. The deepening descent, a symphony of cruelty. As the belt continued to fall in the present, the memories of the years between Maya and this fifth child merged into a horrific montage of sustained agony. She saw herself, malnourished and frail, her ribs beginning to show, being forced to grind massive sacks of wheat for the weakest bread on the heavy stone chakki. It was a job for 2 bullocks or 2 strong women. She did it alone. The scorching summer sun beat down on the courtyard, but she was not allowed rest or sufficient water. Her back, still weak from childbirth, screamed in protest with every rotation of the heavy stone. Sweat and tears carved clean lines through the layer of flour dust on her face. She saw Rohan walk past on his way to the fields. He paused, and she saw a flicker in his eyes, not of compassion, but of a grim acknowledgement of her suffering. It was there and gone in an instant, extinguished when Devi called his name from the shadows of the porch. He moved on, leaving her to her torture. She remembered the kicks. Not the formal, face-to-face slap, but the casual, contemptuous kicks as she worked on the floor. Devi's foot connecting with her hip or ribs as she passed, accidentally of course, a brutal reminder of her place, on the ground, beneath everyone. She relived the theft of her motherhood. Devi would take a crying Maya from her arms. "Your touch is anxious. You are making her nervous. A son needs a strong mother, and you cannot even be that for a daughter." She would isolate Anya, telling a toddling Priya, "Don't bother your mother, she is unwell," twisting the knife of separation. The only solace she had, the love of her children, was systematically poisoned. The final memory before the present catastrophe was the most devastating. It was night. Lying on the thin mattress on the floor beside the marital cot she was no longer allowed to share, she whispered into the darkness, her body aching from a day of blows and labor. "Rohan." Her voice was a broken thread. "Your mother. She kicked me today. My hip, it's bruised." She reached out a hand, her fingers barely brushing his shoulder. She was reaching for the boy by the river, for the man who promised a fortress. He flinched as if her touch was fire. He did not turn. His voice, when it came, was flat, cold, and utterly final. "Then be better," he said. "Give her no reason. Give me a son." He rolled over, presenting his back to her, a wall of rejection. In that moment, the last ember of hope within her died. The pattern was complete. It was not just Devi. It was him. He was not a victim of his mother's tyranny. He was its willing executor. The abuse was not an anomaly. It was the new foundation of their marriage, laid brick by brick with each daughter she bore, each slap he ignored, each kick he permitted, and every meal he let her go without. The man she loved was gone, and in his place was a stranger who saw her not as a wife, but as a failed instrument, deserving of every ounce of her pain. The knowledge did not come as a shock, but as a quiet, settling coldness, like a shard of ice finally finding its home in her heart. It was 2 days after the whipping. Anya was moving through the house like a ghost, her body a tapestry of purple and yellow bruises, each movement a fresh agony. She was in the dank, windowless storage room adjacent to the kitchen, searching for a sack of lentils, her movements slow and painful. Their voices came from the kitchen, not loud, but clear and cutting, carrying the weight of a final judgment. "We cannot keep this one." Devi's voice was decisive, clinical. 5 girls. It is a curse. People are already talking. They say your wife is barren of sons. Anya froze, her breath catching in her raw throat. "What would you have me do, Ma?" Rohan's voice was a weary, defeated thing. "We cannot throw a newborn into the street." "There is a woman from the next village," Devi said, her tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She arranges these things. Good families, who want daughters. They will pay a small sum. It will be gone, and we can be done with it. It is a mercy. What life will it have here?" The word it struck Anya with more force than the belt ever had. They were discussing her daughter, her 5th precious girl, as if she were a stray puppy to be disposed of. Then came the blow that truly annihilated her. "And you," Devi continued, her voice hardening. "It is time. I have spoken to a family from the northern district. They have a strong, healthy daughter. She comes from a line of brothers. She knows how to bear sons. We will send this one away," she meant Anya, "back to her father's house in disgrace. Then you will marry again. A real woman." The silence from Rohan was longer this time. Anya pressed her hand against the cold mud wall, her legs threatening to give way. This was it. The final calculation of her worth. She was to be stripped of her newborn, ejected from her home, and replaced. And her husband. Will the new bride's family agree? Rohan asked, his voice barely audible. The question was not a protest. It was a negotiation. He was acquiescing. He was discussing the terms of her erasure. "Leave that to me," Devi said, a smug triumph in her voice. "We will tell them the first wife was barren and has gone mad. They will believe it. Everyone will." Anya slid down the wall, the rough surface scraping against her wounded back. She did not cry. The tears seemed to have frozen solid inside her. She sat there in the dark, amidst the sacks of grain, the truth settling into her bones. She was not a wife. She was not a daughter-in-law. She was a faulty incubator, soon to be discarded for a newer model. And her children, her Priya, her Maya, her newborn. What would become of them? Would they too be sold off, one by one? Or would they be raised in this house of hatred, beaten and broken into the same cruel mold? The coldness in her heart began to heat, to simmer into a quiet, terrifying rage. That evening, the simmering pot of her fate boiled over. The pain in her back and the deep, soul-shattering anguish had made her slow. The evening meal was not ready when Devi demanded it. The lentils had taken too long to cook over the weak fire. The bread was still being rolled. Devi stormed into the kitchen, her eyes blazing. "Are you trying to starve us? Is this your revenge? Lazy, useless woman." "I am sorry, Ma," Anya whispered, her head bowed, her body tensing for a blow. "It will be ready soon." "Soon is not now." Devi shrieked. She looked around, her eyes wild, and saw the small, heavy pot of lentils, still bubbling over the fire. Without a second thought, consumed by her own irrational fury, she grabbed the handle with a rag, lifted the searingly hot pot, and hurled it directly at Anya. Time seemed to slow. Anya saw the pot tumbling through the air, a dark projectile of scalding liquid and rage. She tried to twist away, but her bruised body was too slow. The pot struck her upper arm, and a wave of blistering, white-hot agony unlike anything she had ever known erupted on her skin. The thick, hot dal splattered across her chest and neck. A choked, guttural scream was torn from her lips as she collapsed to the floor, clutching her arm. The smell of burnt flesh and lentils filled the small room. Through a haze of excruciating pain, her vision blurry with tears, she looked up. Rohan stood in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. He saw her on the floor, writhing, the angry red burn already blistering on her arm, the splatters across her sari. He saw the pot lying on its side, its contents pooling on the dirt floor. He saw his mother, standing over her, chest heaving, not with remorse, but with satisfaction. His eyes met Anya's. In them, she saw a flicker of horror, of shock, but it lasted only a second. Then, his face went blank. Empty. He looked from his wife, scorched and sobbing on the floor, to his mother, the perpetrator. And he did nothing. He did not rush to help Anya. He did not shout at his mother. He did not even speak. He simply turned around and walked away. That walk was the breaking point. The final, deafening silence that followed the sound of the shattering pot was more violent than any blow. The cold, strategic cruelty of their plot to give away her baby had shattered her hope. His mother's physical violence had seared her flesh. But his silent, cowardly retreat, his absolute, final abandonment, shattered her soul. As she lay on the cold, dirty floor, the physical pain a distant echo compared to the absolute void opening inside her, a new clarity emerged. This was not her home. These were not her family. She was alone. And in that absolute aloneness, a fierce, primal instinct was born. The instinct of a mother animal, cornered and wounded, with her young to protect. She would not wait for them to take her child. She would not wait for the new bride to arrive. She would not let her daughters grow up in this house of horrors. The pain in her arm was a brand, a permanent reminder of their evil. The memory of Rohan turning away was the fuel. Tonight, she would leave. Or she would die trying. The world had shrunk to the four walls of the tiny, windowless storeroom where she'd been banished to sleep. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the metallic tang of her own pain. The burn on her arm, wrapped in a filthy rag, throbbed with a rhythmic, searing agony that seemed to pulse in time with her breaking heart. Each beat was a reminder of the hot pot, of Devi's hatred, and of Rohan's retreating back. The silence from the main house was deafening, a void where protection and love should have been. Slowly, painfully, Anya pushed herself up. The bruises on her back shrieked in protest. She ignored them. A new energy, cold and sharp and utterly focused, was coursing through her veins. She crept to the doorway, her ears straining. The only sounds were the rhythmic snores of Devi from her room and the faint, ragged breathing of Rohan from his cot. The house was asleep, oblivious to the revolution brewing in its darkest corner. She turned and looked at her daughters. They were curled together on a thin, frayed mat on the floor, a single threadbare shawl covering them. Priya, her firstborn, was 6. Even in sleep, her small face was pinched, a miniature echo of the anxiety that was her constant companion. One hand was fisted tightly, as if ready to fight off a nightmare. Maya, just 4, was sucking her thumb, her dark lashes wet with recent tears. They slept like refugees, huddled for comfort and warmth. And in that moment, Anya did not see her sleeping children. She saw their future. She saw Priya, a few years older, being slapped for reading a book instead of scrubbing the floor. She saw Maya, her gentle spirit broken, being kicked for dropping a plate. She saw the light in their eyes, the light she had fought so hard to keep kindled, being slowly, methodically extinguished by Devi's cruelty. She saw them being married off to the highest bidder, to men who might be just like Rohan, their worth measured only by the sons they could produce. She saw them becoming her, beaten, broken, and trapped. The vision was so clear, so horrifyingly inevitable, that it stole the air from her lungs. It was no longer about enduring the next slap, surviving the next meal, or praying for a son to change her fate. That hope was a corpse. This was about something far more fundamental. This was about the very souls of her children. A sound, low and guttural, escaped her lips. It was not a sob of self-pity, but a vow ripped from the core of her being. A fierce, protective love, hotter than the burn on her arm and more powerful than all her fear, ignited in her eyes. It was a primal fire, the same fire that drives a wolf to chew off its own leg to escape a trap. The trap was this house. The leg was everything she had ever known. She moved with a quiet, desperate efficiency. There was nothing to pack. She owned nothing. The clothes on her back, a torn, stained sari, were all she had. She knelt, her body screaming in protest, and gently shook Priya awake. The child's eyes flooded open, instantly wide with fear. "Ma, she whispered. Shush, my jewel, Anya murmured, her voice remarkably steady, a calm lake over a raging underground current. We are going on an adventure. A secret adventure. You must be very, very quiet, like a little mouse. Priya, conditioned by a lifetime of fear, nodded, her small face becoming solemn. Anya then lifted the sleeping Maya into her arms. The child was a warm, heavy weight, a burden she would gladly carry to the ends of the earth. She adjusted her, settling Maya's head on her shoulder, the little thumb still securely in her mouth. With her free hand, she took Priya's small, trusting hand. She took one last look around the storeroom. It was not a look of farewell, but of defiance. Then, she led her daughters out into the main room and towards the door. As she unlatched the heavy wooden bolt, the sound seemed explosive in silence. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. But the snores from Devi's room did not falter. She pulled the door open. The night roared in. A torrential monsoon rain was falling in thick, relentless sheets, whipped into a frenzy by a howling wind. It was a wall of water and sound, a chaotic, violent world that was the complete opposite of the stifling, silent prison she was leaving. For a moment, they hesitated on the threshold, the warm, dry darkness of the house at their backs, the cold, wet chaos before them. Then Anya took a step forward. And then another. The rain hit them like a physical blow. It soaked through Anya's sari in an instant, plastering it to her bruised and burned skin. It drenched Priya's thin nightdress and matted Maya's hair. The little girl woke with a start, crying out in confusion and cold. Hush, my love, hush, Anya cooed, her voice barely a whisper against the storm's roar. She held Maya tighter and gripped Priya's hand more firmly. We must be brave. They stumbled into the maelstrom. The village path was already a river of mud, sucking at their bare feet with each step. The wind tore at them, threatening to rip the children from her grasp. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating their desperate figures for a terrifying instant. A ghostly woman, her face a mask of grim determination, a small girl clinging to her side, and a toddler in her arms, all of them silhouetted against the raging night. Thunder crashed around them, a celestial applause for their audacity, or perhaps a warning of the dangers ahead. Priya slipped, falling to her knees in the thick mud. She began to cry, the sound swallowed by the storm. Ma, I'm scared. Anya stopped, her own body trembling with exhaustion and pain. She looked down at her daughter, covered in mud, her small body shaking. She looked at Maya, wailing against her shoulder. And in that moment, standing in the center of the storm, she was the calmest she had ever been. She leaned down, her face close to Priya's. I am scared too, my heart, she said, the truth a bond between them. But we are together. And we are never going back. Do you understand? Never. Something in her mother's voice, a steel that had never been there before, steadied Priya. She nodded, wiping her muddy face with a muddier hand, and pushed herself back up, her small fingers locking with her mother's with a new strength. And so they walked. Anya, the wounded lioness, with her cubs. One child in her arms, a testament to her love. The other clutching her skirt, a testament to her strength. They were three small, insignificant figures against the immense power of the storm. Yet their flight was an act of greater power than any tempest. It was the power of a love that refused to be broken. They left no footprints in the rushing water, vanishing into the darkness, not as victims fleeing a hell, but as pioneers heading toward a desperate, unknown hope. The scene was one of desperate, tragic beauty, a painting of absolute loss and absolute courage, washed clean by the relentless, forgiving rain. O human, tell how the phoenix rises. Anya and her daughters find shelter in a crowded railway station. They are cold, hungry, and terrified. Enter Mr. Sharma, a well-dressed, kind-eyed man. Mr. Sharma sees them. He doesn't offer pity, but respect. He buys them food and, seeing Anya's burned arm, arranges for a doctor. He offers her a job as a live-in helper and nanny for his own family, providing a safe haven. This act of unconditional kindness is the first step in her healing. The storm had finally exhausted its fury, leaving behind a world washed clean but bitterly cold. The three of them huddled together on a grimy, wet bench in the cavernous, echoing railway station. They were drenched spectres, shivering uncontrollably, their teeth chattering in a syncopated rhythm of misery. The adrenaline that had carried Anya through the night had drained away, leaving behind the raw screaming reality of their situation. The deep ache of her bruises, the fiery throb of the burn on her arm, and a hunger so sharp it was a physical pain in her gut. Priya and Maya were silent now, too exhausted and terrified to even cry. They pressed against her, their small bodies seeking a warmth she could no longer provide. Anya wrapped her arms around them, her own shivering making the embrace clumsy. Her eyes, wide and hollow, scanned the bustling crowd. Every uniform, every raised voice, sent a jolt of terror through her. Would Devi and Rohan find them here? Would they be dragged back to that house, to a punishment worse than death? The world was a vast, menacing place, and she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The courage of her flight was crumbling, replaced by a despair so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing her into the cold stone of the bench. It was in this abyss that a shadow fell over them, blocking the harsh fluorescent light. Anya flinched, pulling her daughters closer, her body tensing for a blow. But the voice that spoke was calm, quiet, and devoid of any threat. It seems you have had a difficult journey. She dared to look up. Standing before her was a man she might have mistaken for a god in her former life. He was dressed in a simple, but impeccably clean, white kurta pajama, with a warm woolen shawl draped over his shoulders. His hair was silvered at the temples, and his face was lined not with harshness, but with a quiet wisdom. But it was his eyes that held her. They were kind, deeply so, but they did not hold the pity she had come to expect and despise. Instead, they held a respectful curiosity, as if he were looking at a fellow human being in distress, not a piece of wreckage. He was Mr. Sharma. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not demand their story. He simply observed. His gaze took in Anya's torn and soaked sari, the way she held her injured arm stiffly, the absolute terror in the children's eyes. He saw not beggars, but refugees. "Your arm," he said, his voice still low. "It is injured." Anya instinctively curled her hand over the filthy rag covering the burn, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. Mr. Sharma did not press. He simply turned and gestured to a chaiwala at a nearby stall. A few moments later, he returned with a small clay pot of steaming, sweet tea and a packet of glucose biscuits. He did not hand it to her with a flourish of charity. He placed it on the bench beside her, a respectful distance away, as an offering she could choose to accept. "For the children," he said softly. "The sugar will help with the shock." Anya stared at the food, her hunger warring with a lifetime of suspicion. But Priya's small, desperate whimper decided it. With trembling hands, she took a biscuit and gave it to her daughters. The way they devoured it, the way the hot tea brought a flicker of color back to their blue-tinged lips, broke something open inside her. A single, hot tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Mr. Sharma waited until the children had eaten. He then knelt down, bringing himself to their level, his movements slow and non-threatening. "My name is Sharma," he said. "I live in the city. My own children are grown, but my home is too quiet. My wife, she passed some years ago, and we could use some help. We need someone who is strong, who knows how to care for a home." His eyes met Anya's. It would provide a room, food, safety. He was offering her a job. Not arms, not pity. He was offering her work, and with it, her dignity. He then gestured to her arm again. "But first, a doctor. That needs to be seen to. You cannot work if you are not well." It was this final act, this simple, practical kindness that acknowledged her pain without defining her by it, that shattered the last of her defenses. He wasn't just offering shelter. He was offering to mend the most immediate evidence of her brokenness. Anya looked from his kind, calm face to her daughters, who were now watching the stranger with a dawning, tentative hope. She saw the future in that moment, the cold street, or the warm, safe room he promised, the gnawing hunger, or the certainty of a meal, the relentless fear, or the fragile chance to heal. She tried to speak, to thank him, but all that came out was a choked, ragged sob. She could only nod, a violent, grateful motion that sent more tears streaming down her face. Mr. Sharma simply nodded in return, a silent understanding passing between them. He did not touch her. He did not try to comfort her with empty words. He simply stood and said, "Then let us go. The car is waiting." As she gathered her daughters and stood on trembling legs, following the stranger into the uncertain dawn, Anya felt it. It was not happiness. It was not yet hope. It was something more fundamental, the first, tentative beat of a heart that had almost stopped. It was the first, fragile stirring of a phoenix, finding its feet in the warm ashes of a simple, human kindness. The long, dark night was over. The slow, painful rise could now begin. The first light of dawn streamed through the clean, large windows of Mr. Sharma's home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, hopeful spirits. For the first time in years, Anya woke not to the sound of curses, but to the gentle chirping of sparrows in the courtyard garden. The room she shared with her daughters was simple, but it was theirs. It had a lock on the inside. The begins here, set to a soft, melodic score, perhaps a single piano or sitar, gentle and rising. The first true peace Anya had ever known came with the scent of jasmine. It drifted through the open window of the small, clean room Mr. Sharma had given them, a room with a lock on the inside. That first dawn, she woke not to the sound of Devi's grating voice, but to the gentle chirping of sparrows and the soft, even breathing of her daughters beside her. For a long time, she simply lay there, listening, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did not. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the courtyard and the distant, friendly clatter of pans from the kitchen where the cook was preparing breakfast. The healing was a slow, deliberate ballet. A kind-faced woman doctor came to the house, clicking her tongue softly as she unwrapped the filthy rag from Anya's arm. The burn was a grotesque, weeping testament to her old life. Anya flinched, but the doctor's hands were firm and gentle. "This will heal," the woman said, her voice matter-of-fact, and in those words, Anya heard a promise that extended far beyond her skin. Mr. Sharma was a quiet sentinel in the doorway, his presence not intrusive but protective. Later, a tray would appear outside her room, a bowl of steaming lentils, a stack of soft rotis, a small pot of golden honey, and a bottle of medicine. It was the first meal she hadn't had to beg for or scavenge. In the weeks that followed, she watched her body transform. The lurid purple and yellow bruises on her back faded to faint, ghostly smudges before disappearing entirely. The sharp, skeletal angles of her frame softened as consistent, nourishing food did its work. She would stand before the mirror in the clean bathroom, her fingers tracing the silvery, healed line on her arm. It was no longer a mark of shame. It was a scar, a battle standard from a war she had survived. But the most profound healing happened in the quiet of the night. Once Priya and Maya were asleep, their faces smooth and untroubled by dreams, Anya would light a small lamp. She pulled a book from the modest shelf in the corner, a simple reader that had once belonged to Mr. Sharma's son. Her brow would furrow in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traced the words with a hesitant finger. She started with children's tales, then moved to the newspapers Mr. Sharma left on the table. The world, once confined to the four walls of a prison, began to expand with every sentence she deciphered. This nightly ritual was not a task, it was a reclamation. She was reclaiming the intelligent, curious girl who had once laughed in the monsoon rain. That reclaimed strength became the bedrock of her daughters' new lives. She was no longer just a mother who comforted, she was a teacher who empowered. In the sun-drenched garden, she would point to a flowering hibiscus. "This is a hibiscus," she would say, and Priya, her eyes alight with a native curiosity Anya had never seen before, would repeat the word, storing it like a treasure. Her most important lessons, however, came at the small wooden table where they did their homework. She would look at them, her gaze steady and fierce. "Never, ever let anyone tell you that you are a burden," she would whisper, her voice low and intense. "You are a blessing. Your mind is your greatest power. You can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, the Prime Minister. You can be anything." She poured the conviction she had found in her own escape into them, and they drank it in, their spines straightening, their chins lifting. The years folded into one another, marked not by fear, but by growth. Priya, now a teenager, became a creature of quiet, intense focus. Her corner of their room was a nest of thick science textbooks, and a meticulously painted model of the solar system she had built herself rotated slowly from a ceiling. Maya discovered her voice. It became a clear, confident instrument she wielded in school halls, dismantling her opponents in debates with sharp logic and a passionate, unwavering sense of justice. Through it all, Mr. Sharma was their quiet patron. Anya would catch him watching her, not with the predatory gaze of her former husband, but with a deep, respectful admiration. He noticed how she had intuitively organized his chaotic library, the insightful questions she sometimes dared to ask about a news article, the quiet grace with which she moved through his home. He began to leave books for her on a side table, a volume of poetry, a history of the region, a novel by a celebrated Indian author. It was a silent conversation, a meeting of minds. Their interactions were sparse but profound. A shared pot of tea in the evening silence, the space between them comfortable, not strained. The day he handed her a pamphlet for a government loan program for women entrepreneurs, having noticed her exquisite skill with a needle and thread. Her eyes, wide with surprise, had met his, and in that wordless exchange was a world of mutual respect. What grew between them was a subtle, profound intimacy, a stark contrast to the desperate, fiery passion of her youth. That had been a flame that consumed. This was the steady, enduring warmth of a hearth. One evening, Anya paused in her sewing. She looked across the room at Priya, lost in a physics problem, her pencil flying across the page. She listened to Maya in the next room, practicing a speech, her voice resonant and sure. Mr. Sharma sat in his armchair, a book open in his lap, but he was not reading. He was watching them, a look of profound peace on his face. Anya felt a serene smile touch her own lips. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had built a new nest, strong and secure, and within it, she was watching her daughters learn to fly. We see a doctor, a kind-faced woman, carefully unwrapping the filthy rag from Anya's arm. The burn is angry and blistered. Anya flinches, but not from the pain, from the shame of being seen. The doctor cleans and dresses it with expert, gentle hands. Mr. Sharma stands quietly in the doorway, ensuring she is comfortable, then leaves a tray with food and medicine outside her room. A series of quick shots follow. Anya's hands, once raw and calloused from brutal labor, now gently applying a healing salve to her own wounds in the mirror. The bruises on her back slowly fade from violent purple to a faint, yellowing memory. The tension in her shoulders begins to ease. Nighttime falls. The house is silent. Priya and Maya are asleep in their clean beds, their faces peaceful. Anya sits by a small lamp in the corner of her room. In her hands is a book, a simple children's reader that belonged to Mr. Sharma's son. Her brow is furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traces the words with a hesitant finger. This is not a chore, it is a sacrament. She moves from children's books to newspapers left on the table, sounding out the headlines. We see her, night after night, a silhouette of quiet determination against the lamplight, reclaiming a part of herself that had been locked away. The scene shifts to a sun-drenched afternoon. Anya is in the garden with her daughters. She is not just a mother now, she is a teacher. She points to a flowering plant. This is a hibiscus, she says, and Priya, her eyes wide with curiosity, repeats the word. Later, Anya sits with them at a small table, helping them with their schoolwork, but her lessons are deeper than academics. She looks at them, her gaze steady and full of fire. Never let anyone tell you that you are a burden, she whispers, her voice fierce with conviction. You are a blessing. Your mind is your greatest power. You can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, the Prime Minister. You can be anything. The words, repeated like a mantra, begin to etch themselves into their very souls. Years begin to fold into one another. We see Priya, now a teenager, bent over thick science textbooks, a model of the solar system she built herself rotating slowly above her desk. Her face is a mask of intense focus, a young scientist in the making. We see Maya, her voice clear and confident, standing in a school hall, debating another student. Her arguments are sharp, her logic precise, her presence commanding. She is finding her power in words. Throughout this, Mr. Sharma is a quiet, steady presence. We see him watching Anya not with the possessive gaze of a master, but with a deep, respectful admiration. He notices the way she has organized his library, the intelligent questions she asks about the world, the quiet dignity with which she carries herself. He leaves books he thinks she might enjoy on a table for her to find. Their interactions are brief but profound. A shared glance of understanding over a cup of tea in the quiet of the evening. Him handing her an application form for a small business loan for women, having noticed her talent for sewing and design. Her surprised, grateful eyes meeting his. There is a subtle, growing intimacy in these moments, but it is built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared appreciation for quiet strength. It is a world away from the frantic, desperate passion of her youth with Rohan. This is a slow, deep current of regard, a meeting of minds and spirits in the peaceful autumn of their lives. The montage ends with a wide shot of the house at dusk, lights glowing warmly from the windows. Inside, Priya is studying, Maya is practicing a speech, and Anya is sewing, a small, serene smile on her face as she looks up and sees her daughters thriving. Mr. Sharma sits in his armchair, reading, but his eyes lift to watch the family he has helped create, his own expression one of profound peace. The phoenix has not only risen, she has built a nest, and in it, she was nurturing a new generation of giants. The first true peace Anya had ever known came with the scent of jasmine. It drifted through the open window of the small, clean room Mr. Sharma had given them, a room with a lock on the inside. That first dawn, she woke not to the sound of Devi's grating voice, but to the gentle chirping of sparrows and the soft, even breathing of her daughters beside her. For a long time, she simply lay there, listening, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did not. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the courtyard and the distant, friendly clatter of pans from the kitchen where the cook was preparing breakfast. The healing was a slow, deliberate ballet. A kind-faced woman doctor came to the house, clicking her tongue softly as she unwrapped the filthy rag from Anya's arm. The burn was a grotesque, weeping testament to her old life. Anya flinched, but the doctor's hands were firm and gentle. "This will heal," the woman said, her voice matter-of-fact, and in those words, Anya heard a promise that extended far beyond her skin. Mr. Sharma was a quiet sentinel in the doorway, his presence not intrusive but protective. Later, a tray would appear outside her room, a bowl of steaming lentils, a stack of soft rotis, a small pot of golden honey, and a bottle of medicine. It was the first meal she hadn't had to beg for or scavenge. In the weeks that followed, she watched her body transform. The lurid purple and yellow bruises on her back faded to faint, ghostly smudges before disappearing entirely. The sharp, skeletal angles of her frame softened as consistent, nourishing food did its work. She would stand before the mirror in the clean bathroom, her fingers tracing the silvery, healed line on her arm. It was no longer a mark of shame. It was a scar, a battle standard from a war she had survived. But the most profound healing happened in the quiet of the night. Once Priya and Maya were asleep, their faces smooth and untroubled by dreams, Anya would light a small lamp. She pulled a book from the modest shelf in the corner, a simple reader that had once belonged to Mr. Sharma's son. Her brow would furrow in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traced the words with a hesitant finger. She started with children's tales, then moved to the newspapers Mr. Sharma left on the table. The world, once confined to the four walls of a prison, began to expand with every sentence she deciphered. This nightly ritual was not a task, it was a reclamation. She was reclaiming the intelligent, curious girl who had once laughed in the monsoon rain. That reclaimed strength became the bedrock of her daughters' new lives. She was no longer just a mother who comforted, she was a teacher who empowered. In the sun-drenched garden, she would point to a flowering hibiscus. "This is a hibiscus," she would say, and Priya, her eyes alight with a native curiosity Anya had never seen before, would repeat the word, storing it like a treasure. Her most important lessons, however, came at the small wooden table where they did their homework. She would look at them, her gaze steady and fierce. "Never, ever let anyone tell you that you are a burden," she would whisper, her voice low and intense. "You are a blessing. Your mind is your greatest power. You can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, the Prime Minister. You can be anything star." She poured the conviction she had found in her own escape into them, and they drank it in, their spines straightening, their chins lifting. The years folded into one another, marked not by fear, but by growth. Priya, now a teenager, became a creature of quiet, intense focus. Her corner of their room was a nest of thick science textbooks, and a meticulously painted model of the solar system she had built herself rotated slowly from a ceiling. Maya discovered her voice. It became a clear, confident instrument she wielded in school halls, dismantling her opponents in debates with sharp logic and a passionate, unwavering sense of justice. Through it all, Mr. Sharma was their quiet patron. Anya would catch him watching her, not with the predatory gaze of her former husband, but with a deep, respectful admiration. He noticed how she had intuitively organized his chaotic library, the insightful questions she sometimes dared to ask about a news article, the quiet grace with which she moved through his home. He began to leave books for her on a side table, a volume of poetry, a history of the region, a novel by a celebrated Indian author. It was a silent conversation, a meeting of minds. The light in Dr. Evan Reed's office was different now. It wasn't the harsh, interrogating glare of a year ago, but a warm, afternoon gold that poured through the window, catching the dust motes and making them dance. It was the kind of light that promised gentle endings and quiet beginnings. Lily sat on the examination table, not lying back, but perched on the edge, her legs swinging in a rhythm that was now effortless. She wore a simple dress dotted with little strawberries, and her hair, a wild, wonderful cap of dark curls, bounced with every movement. She was humming. Evan finished his notes, the final results of her scans and blood work laid out before him. He closed the file with a deliberate, soft snap. The sound was a period at the end of a long, terrifying sentence. "Lily Evans," he said, his voice steady but filled with a profound, quiet warmth. He looked from her to Sarah and Mark, who were holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Mark pulled her into his arms, his own shoulders slumping with the final, glorious sheer, unloading, of a burden he had carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. But Evan's eyes were on Lily. She had stopped swinging her legs. She looked at him, her head tilted, her luminous eyes seeing right into the heart of him. She didn't cheer or clap. She simply absorbed the news, as if a deep, internal tuning fork had been struck and was now vibrating at perfect pitch. Then, she slid off the table and walked to his desk. On it, next to a model of a DNA helix and a stack of medical journals, stood 2 frames. One was the original photo of his daughter, Clara, her gap-toothed smile forever frozen in time. The other was new, a picture of Evan and Lily, taken just a month prior in the hospital garden. He was holding her on his shoulders, and they were both caught in a moment of unrestrained, belly-deep laughter. It was the picture of a man who had learned how to live again. Lily studied the 2 photos side by side. She then turned and unzipped her small backpack, pulling out a piece of paper, carefully folded. She walked back to Evan and held it out to him. "This is for you," she said, her voice clear as a bell. Evan took it. His fingers, usually so steady for procedures and surgeries, trembled slightly as he unfolded it. It was a drawing in crayon. There were 2 stick figures. One, taller, wore a blue rectangle for a body and a black squiggle on its head for hair. It held the hand of a smaller figure in a pink triangle dress, with a wild brown scribble of hair. Between them, floating in the air, were a series of wobbly, connected circles, musical notes. There was no hospital bed, no needles, no sickness. Just a doctor, a little girl, and the music that flowed between them. But it was the title, written in a wobbly, earnest script across the top, that stole the air from his lungs. It read, "How we saved each other." The intensity of the moment was overwhelming. The clinical walls of the office seemed to fall away. Evan was no longer a doctor delivering good news. He was a man being handed the meaning of his own salvation, articulated by the one person who truly understood. She hadn't drawn the doctor who saved me. She had drawn a duet, a mutual rescue. A ragged sob escaped him. He brought a hand to his mouth, trying to contain the wave of emotion, but it was useless. Tears he had suppressed for years, for Clara, for his own failure, for the terrifying gamble he had asked this family to take, now flowed freely. They were not tears of sadness, but of a grief finally, fully transformed. He looked down at Lily, who was watching him with that same deep, knowing empathy she had possessed from the very beginning. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, the words choked and thick. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He went to a cabinet, found a simple, wooden frame, and carefully, reverently, placed the drawing inside. He then returned to his desk. He moved the model of the DNA helix aside. He cleared a sacred space. And there, right next to the photograph of his Clara, he placed Lily's drawing. The 2 frames now stood together. A life lost and a life saved. A memory of past joy and a testament to a joy reclaimed. They were not in opposition, but in conversation, forever connected by the invisible, unbreakable thread of a song, the sound of hope that had, against all odds, healed them both. He looked at the 2 little girls on his desk, one in a photograph, one standing before him, and he felt a peace so complete it was almost dizzying. The story wasn't about a cure. It was about a chord that had been struck in the darkness, a chord made of courage, science, and unconditional love, and it would resonate for the rest of their lives. Their interactions were sparse but profound. A shared pot of tea in the evening silence, the space between them comfortable, not strained. The day he handed her a pamphlet for a government loan program for women entrepreneurs, having noticed her exquisite skill with a needle and thread. Her eyes, wide with surprise, had met his, and in that wordless exchange was a world of mutual respect. What grew between them was a subtle, profound intimacy, a stark contrast to the desperate, fiery passion of her youth. That had been a flame that consumed. This was the steady, enduring warmth of a hearth. One evening, Anya paused in her sewing. She looked across the room at Priya, lost in a physics problem, her pencil flying across the page. She listened to Maya in the next room, practicing a speech, her voice resonant and sure. Mr. Sharma sat in his armchair, a book open in his lap, but he was not reading. He was watching them, a look of profound peace on his face. Anya felt a serene smile touch her own lips. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had built a new nest, strong and secure, and within it, she was watching her daughters learn to fly. We see a doctor, a kind-faced woman, carefully unwrapping the filthy rag from Anya's arm. The burn is angry and blistered. Anya flinches, but not from the pain, from the shame of being seen. The doctor cleans and dresses it with expert, gentle hands. Mr. Sharma stands quietly in the doorway, ensuring she is comfortable, then leaves a tray with food and medicine outside her room. A series of quick shots follow. Anya's hands, once raw and calloused from brutal labor, now gently applying a healing salve to her own wounds in the mirror. The bruises on her back slowly fade from violent purple to a faint, yellowing memory. The tension in her shoulders begins to ease. Nighttime falls. The house is silent. Priya and Maya are asleep in their clean beds, their faces peaceful. Anya sits by a small lamp in the corner of her room. In her hands is a book, a simple children's reader that belonged to Mr. Sharma's son. Her brow is furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traces the words with a hesitant finger. This is not a chore, it is a sacrament. She moves from children's books to newspapers left on the table, sounding out the headlines. We see her, night after night, a silhouette of quiet determination against the lamplight, reclaiming a part of herself that had been locked away. The scene shifts to a sun-drenched afternoon. Anya is in the garden with her daughters. She is not just a mother now, she is a teacher. She points to a flowering plant. This is a hibiscus, she says, and Priya, her eyes wide with curiosity, repeats the word. Later, Anya sits with them at a small table, helping them with their schoolwork, but her lessons are deeper than academics. She looks at them, her gaze steady and full of fire. Never let anyone tell you that you are a burden, she whispers, her voice fierce with conviction. You are a blessing. Your mind is your greatest power. You can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, the Prime Minister. You can be anything. The words, repeated like a mantra, begin to etch themselves into their very souls. Years begin to fold into one another. We see Priya, now a teenager, bent over thick science textbooks, a model of the solar system she built herself rotating slowly above her desk. Her face is a mask of intense focus, a young scientist in the making. We see Maya, her voice clear and confident, standing in a school hall, debating another student. Her arguments are sharp, her logic precise, her presence commanding. She is finding her power in words. Throughout this, Mr. Sharma is a quiet, steady presence. We see him watching Anya not with the possessive gaze of a master, but with a deep, respectful admiration. He notices the way she has organized his library, the intelligent questions she asks about the world, the quiet dignity with which she carries herself. He leaves books he thinks she might enjoy on a table for her to find. Their interactions are brief but profound. A shared glance of understanding over a cup of tea in the quiet of the evening. Him handing her an application form for a small business loan for women, having noticed her talent for sewing and design. Her surprised, grateful eyes meeting his. There is a subtle, growing intimacy in these moments, but it is built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared appreciation for quiet strength. It is a world away from the frantic, desperate passion of her youth with Rohan. This is a slow, deep current of regard, a meeting of minds and spirits in the peaceful autumn of their lives. The montage ends with a wide shot of the house at dusk, lights glowing warmly from the windows. Inside, Priya is studying, Maya is practicing a speech, and Anya is sewing, a small, serene smile on her face as she looks up and sees her daughters thriving. Mr. Sharma sits in his armchair, reading, but his eyes lift to watch the family he has helped create, his own expression one of profound peace. The phoenix has not only risen, she has built a nest, and in it, she was nurturing a new generation of giants. The first true peace Anya had ever known came with the scent of jasmine. It drifted through the open window of the small, clean room Mr. Sharma had given them, a room with a lock on the inside. That first dawn, she woke not to the sound of Devi's grating voice, but to the gentle chirping of sparrows and the soft, even breathing of her daughters beside her. For a long time, she simply lay there, listening, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did not. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the courtyard and the distant, friendly clatter of pans from the kitchen where the cook was preparing breakfast. The healing was a slow, deliberate ballet. A kind-faced woman doctor came to the house, clicking her tongue softly as she unwrapped the filthy rag from Anya's arm. The burn was a grotesque, weeping testament to her old life. Anya flinched, but the doctor's hands were firm and gentle. "This will heal," the woman said, her voice matter-of-fact, and in those words, Anya heard a promise that extended far beyond her skin. Mr. Sharma was a quiet sentinel in the doorway, his presence not intrusive but protective. Later, a tray would appear outside her room, a bowl of steaming lentils, a stack of soft rotis, a small pot of golden honey, and a bottle of medicine. It was the first meal she hadn't had to beg for or scavenge. In the weeks that followed, she watched her body transform. The lurid purple and yellow bruises on her back faded to faint, ghostly smudges before disappearing entirely. The sharp, skeletal angles of her frame softened as consistent, nourishing food did its work. She would stand before the mirror in the clean bathroom, her fingers tracing the silvery, healed line on her arm. It was no longer a mark of shame. It was a scar, a battle standard from a war she had survived. But the most profound healing happened in the quiet of the night. Once Priya and Maya were asleep, their faces smooth and untroubled by dreams, Anya would light a small lamp. She pulled a book from the modest shelf in the corner, a simple reader that had once belonged to Mr. Sharma's son. Her brow would furrow in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traced the words with a hesitant finger. She started with children's tales, then moved to the newspapers Mr. Sharma left on the table. The world, once confined to the four walls of a prison, began to expand with every sentence she deciphered. This nightly ritual was not a task, it was a reclamation. She was reclaiming the intelligent, curious girl who had once laughed in the monsoon rain. That reclaimed strength became the bedrock of her daughters' new lives. She was no longer just a mother who comforted, she was a teacher who empowered. In the sun-drenched garden, she would point to a flowering hibiscus. "This is a hibiscus," she would say, and Priya, her eyes alight with a native curiosity Anya had never seen before, would repeat the word, storing it like a treasure. Her most important lessons, however, came at the small wooden table where they did their homework. She would look at them, her gaze steady and fierce. "Never, ever let anyone tell you that you are a burden," she would whisper, her voice low and intense. "You are a blessing. Your mind is your greatest power. You can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, the Prime Minister. You can be asterisk anything star." She poured the conviction she had found in her own escape into them, and they drank it in, their spines straightening, their chins lifting. The years folded into one another, marked not by fear, but by growth. Priya, now a teenager, became a creature of quiet, intense focus. Her corner of their room was a nest of thick science textbooks, and a meticulously painted model of the solar system she had built herself rotated slowly from a ceiling. Maya discovered her voice. It became a clear, confident instrument she wielded in school halls, dismantling her opponents in debates with sharp logic and a passionate, unwavering sense of justice. Through it all, Mr. Sharma was their quiet patron. Anya would catch him watching her, not with the predatory gaze of her former husband, but with a deep, respectful admiration. He noticed how she had intuitively organized his chaotic library, the insightful questions she sometimes dared to ask about a news article, the quiet grace with which she moved through his home. He began to leave books for her on a side table, a volume of poetry, a history of the region, a novel by a celebrated Indian author. It was a silent conversation, a meeting of minds. Their interactions were sparse but profound. A shared pot of tea in the evening silence, the space between them comfortable, not strained. The day he handed her a pamphlet for a government loan program for women entrepreneurs, having noticed her exquisite skill with a needle and thread. Her eyes, wide with surprise, had met his, and in that wordless exchange was a world of mutual respect. What grew between them was a subtle, profound intimacy, a stark contrast to the desperate, fiery passion of her youth. That had been a flame that consumed. This was the steady, enduring warmth of a hearth. One evening, Anya paused in her sewing. She looked across the room at Priya, lost in a physics problem, her pencil flying across the page. She listened to Maya in the next room, practicing a speech, her voice resonant and sure. Mr. Sharma sat in his armchair, a book open in his lap, but he was not reading. He was watching them, a look of profound peace on his face. Anya felt a serene smile touch her own lips. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had built a new nest, strong and secure, and within it, she was watching her daughters learn to fly. The gentle rhythm of the passing years in Mr. Sharma's home was not marked by the harsh cycles of sowing and harvest, but by the quiet, triumphant blossoming of 3 lives. The little girls, once terrified shadows huddled on a railway station bench, were now young women who walked with an innate confidence that seemed to alter the very air around them. Priya, with her fierce, analytical mind, moved through the world with a quiet intensity. Her room was a sanctuary of order and knowledge, filled with medical textbooks whose pages were worn soft from study. She had been accepted into a prestigious medical college on a full scholarship, her acceptance letter a document that Anya kept wrapped in silk, a sacred text of a new faith. Priya's hands, which had once clutched her mother's skirt in a storm, were now steady and capable, destined to hold a scalpel and mend the broken bodies of others. Maya's transformation was more public. Her voice, once used only for whispered pleas, had become a powerful tool. She had blossomed into a formidable debater and orator, her arguments weaving together logic and a deep, empathetic understanding of human rights that came from a place of lived experience. She pursued a degree in law, her ambition not for wealth, but for justice. "I will fight for those who can't fight for themselves, Ma," she would say, her eyes flashing with the same protective fire that had once ignited in Agnes on that terrible night. And Anya. Anya was no longer the helper, the nanny, or the victim. The seed of an idea, nurtured by Mr. Sharma's unwavering belief, had taken root. It began at the small wooden table in her room, with a single sewing machine he had gifted her. Using scraps of fabric, she began creating designs, not the traditional patterns of her village, but something new. She blended the rich, vibrant colors of her past with the clean, elegant lines of the city, creating kurtas and sares that were both timeless and modern. Mr. Sharma, with his business acumen, saw not just hobby, but potential. He helped her secure a small loan, not as a charity, but as an investor. "Your hands do not just mend," he told her, his voice full of respect. "They create beauty from memory." Her first orders came from the mothers of Priya and Maya's friends, who admired the unique pieces the girls wore. Then, a small boutique in the city took notice. Anya's home-based operations slowly expanded. She hired 2 other women from the neighborhood, teaching them her craft, creating a small, self-sustaining sisterhood of creation. The gentle whir of the sewing machine became the soundtrack of their home, a sound of industry and hope, so different from the oppressive silence or violent shouts of her old life. Her label, simply named Anya, began to appear on tags in upscale stores. She was no longer using scraps. She was sourcing fine silks and cottons, her designs now sketched in a proper ledger. She was invited to a local craft fair, and Mr. Sharma stood proudly by her side as customers marveled at her work. She did not shy away. She looked them in the eye, discussed her designs, and spoke of her fabrics with the authority of a master craftswoman. The woman who had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back was now a business owner. The one who had been told she was worthless was now creating things of value that were sought after and cherished. The scars on her arm and back were hidden beneath the beautiful fabric she designed, but they were a part of the tapestry of her strength, not a brand of her shame. One evening, she stood on the veranda of Mr. Sharma's house, which had long since felt entirely like her own home. She watched Priya in the garden, explaining a complex biological concept to Mr. Sharma with animated hands. She listened to Maya inside, passionately practicing her closing argument for a mock trial. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and the sounds of their vibrant, assured lives. Anya looked down at her own hands. They were no longer raw and torn from grinding wheat or scrubbing floors. They were the steady, skilled hands of an artist and an entrepreneur. They were clean, adorned only with a single silver ring she had bought for herself with her first major profit. A deep, quiet satisfaction settled in her soul. She had not just escaped a hell. She had built a heaven. The world had tried to break her, to define her as a failure. But now, she was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was Anya, a mother, a creator, and she was, finally, free. The grand, old house no longer simply belonged to Mr. Sharma. It had been transformed, over the years, into a home that was unmistakably, beautifully asterisked their star. It was a place of quiet industry and resonant life. The scent of books and brewing tea mingled with the faint, clean smell of silk and cotton from Anya's studio, which had once been a spare bedroom. Anya, now in her late 40s, moved through the rooms with a poise that seemed to deepen with each passing year. The frantic fear that had once haunted her eyes had been replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. She carried herself with a quiet grace that spoke not of submission, but of hard-won peace. Her success as the owner of the Anya boutique label was not a loud, brash thing. It was a steady, respected presence in the city's fashion scene, a testament to her vision and resilience. Her daughters were the living embodiments of that resilience. Dr. Priya Sharma, at 28, was a rising star in the cardiology department of the city's best hospital. Her name commanded respect in medical circles, her diagnostic skill and steady hands saving lives that others had given up on. Maya Sharma, at 26, was a force of nature in the courtroom. As a human rights lawyer, her voice was a weapon she wielded with precision and ferocity, her name appearing in the papers beside headlines of landmark judgments for the oppressed and the marginalized. They were no longer the shivering, hungry girls from the railway station. They were giants, and their mother's love had been the soil in which they grew. One evening, with the setting sun casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard garden, Mr. Sharma found Anya tending to her jasmine plants. The flowers had finally bloomed for her, their scent a perfect, fragrant circle closing on a long-ago promise. He was older, his hair fully silver now, but his eyes held the same kind intelligence that had been her first lifeline. "Anya," he began, his voice soft yet formal. He did not call her often by her name, and it made her still, her hands pausing among the leaves. He gestured for her to sit with him on the stone bench. "We have built a good life together, have we not?" The house that had once been a place of terror for Anya was now a tomb, slowly being reclaimed by dust and decay. The walls, which had echoed with Devi's shrieks and the sounds of violence, were now stained with patches of dampness and peeling plaster. The courtyard where Anya had been forced to grind wheat under the blistering sun was now choked with weeds, a testament to a legacy of neglect. Inside, the air was thick and stale, smelling of unwashed bodies, cheap medicine, and despair. Devi lay on a cot in the main room, the same room where she had once held court over Anya's suffering. But the cot was now her prison. A stroke had left half her body paralyzed, twisting her face into a permanent sneer. Her eyes, still sharp with malice, burned from a sunken face. The once powerful matriarch was now a shrunken, bitter husk, her venom having nowhere to go but inward, poisoning her from the inside out. She spent her days issuing weak, slurred commands and curses, her voice a rasping echo of its former power. Rohan moved through the shadows of the house like a ghost. He was a hollow man, his shoulders permanently stooped not under a burden of work, but under the immense weight of his own regret. The business had failed years ago, the money squandered through poor decisions and a lack of the very diligence Anya had once provided for free. Desperate to fulfill his mother's obsession and prove his own masculinity, he had married again. The woman, chosen for her strong hips and family of brothers, had turned out to be as cruel as Devi, but with a cunning greed he was ill-equipped to handle. She had taken what little remained of his savings and fled, leaving him with nothing but a deeper, more profound humiliation. Now, he was his mother's sole, resentful caretaker. He would spoon thin, tasteless gruel into her mouth, wiping the dribble from her chin with a rough, impatient hand. He changed her soiled sheets, his face a mask of disgust. Every whimper from her, every demand, was a sharp reminder of the path he had chosen. He had traded a wife of quiet strength and intelligence for a tyrant who had broken him, and now he was chained to her rotting corpse. He would sometimes stand at the doorway, staring at the empty space where Anya and his daughters used to sleep. The silence in the house was a physical presence, and in it, he could hear the ghosts of what might have been, the laughter of his educated, successful daughters, the gentle hum of a happy home, the respect of a wife who looked at him with love instead of fear. He had thought he was building a legacy with a son. Instead, he had presided over the utter annihilation of his own family. The regret was a cancer, eating him alive. It was nameless because he could never bring himself to speak it aloud, to give voice to the monstrous folly of his actions. He was alone in the dark, dilapidated shell of his life, with only the rasping breath of the author of his misery for company. They were two ruins, propping each other up in a shared damnation, their bitterness the only thing they had left to consume. The sound was a wet, gurgling rasp, followed by a thud. Rohan, who had been dozing fitfully in a corner, jerked awake. His mother was on the floor beside her cot, her body contorted, her one good hand clawing at her chest. Her face was a horrifying shade of grey, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely new. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. For a moment, he was paralyzed, staring at the woman who had been the center of his universe, now seemingly breaking apart at its core. Then, a lifetime of conditioned obedience took over. He scrambled to her, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He managed to heave her limp, heavy body into a rickshaw, shouting the name of the city's best, most modern hospital at the driver, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a place he could never afford, but in his terror, it was the only destination he could conceive of. The hospital was a world of blinding white light, antiseptic smells, and a quiet, efficient chaos that overwhelmed him. He stumbled through the automated doors, half carrying, half dragging his mother, his shouts for help raw and desperate. A team of nurses descended with a gurney, their movements swift and practiced. They transferred Devi's writhing form and whisked her away, leaving Rohan standing alone in the bustling corridor, his clothes stained, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A young, serious-faced junior doctor approached him. "She is having a major myocardial infarction. We are taking her to the cath lab. Dr. Sharma is on call. She is our best. She will take over." Rohan barely heard the medical terms. He simply nodded, his mind a numb void. He was directed to a private waiting area outside the critical care unit. It was there, as he paced the sterile floor, that his eyes landed on a large, polished plaque on the wall. It displayed the names and photographs of the senior cardiology staff. And he saw her. The air left his lungs in a single, silent whoosh. It was Priya. But it wasn't the little girl with fearful eyes who had clutched her mother's skirt. This woman in the photograph was poised, her hair neatly tied back, her white coat stark and authoritative against her dark skin. Her eyes, Anya's eyes looked directly into the camera with an expression of calm, unwavering competence. Below the picture, the inscription read, Dr. Priya Sharma, MD, Chief of Cardiology. The shock of recognition was not a gentle wave. It was a physical blow, a jolt of electricity that rooted him to the spot. He stared, his mouth agape, the sounds of the hospital fading into a dull roar. This was his daughter. The first failure. The one whose birth had begun the slow creep of shadows in his home. And she was this. A chief. A savior of lives, in a temple of science he could barely comprehend. Shame descended upon him, immediate and crushing. It was a hot, suffocating weight that squeezed his heart tighter than any heart attack could. He saw, with horrifying clarity, the memory of himself turning away as she cried as a baby, of his silence as she was denied food, of his compliance as she was isolated from her mother. He saw the whipping, and he knew, with a certainty that made him dizzy, that she had probably witnessed it, her small, terrified face watching from a dark corner. He was suddenly, violently aware of his own filth, the grime under his nails, the stale odor of poverty on his clothes, the profound moral decay that he carried in his soul. He, the man who had believed a son would be his legacy, was a destitute failure. And his daughter, the one he had deemed worthless, was a renowned doctor in whose hands his mother's miserable life now rested. He stumbled back and collapsed into a plastic chair, his head in his hands. He couldn't look at the plaque anymore. The image of Dr. Priya Sharma was a mirror reflecting back every wrong choice, every act of cowardice, every ounce of cruelty he had ever permitted. The weight of it was unbearable. He was no longer a man waiting for a doctor. He was a sinner awaiting judgment at the altar of his own discarded child. Time lost all meaning for Rohan as he sat in the sterile waiting room, the photograph of Dr. Priya Sharma burning a hole in his mind. When the door finally swung open and she emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, her face was etched with a professional calm that was more terrifying than any anger. He scrambled to his feet, his body trembling. Priya. He choked out, the name foreign and shameful on his tongue. He fell to his knees, not as a dramatic gesture, but because his legs simply gave way. Please, save her. I beg you. Priya looked down at the man groveling at her feet, the figure who had once been a giant of fear in her childhood. There was no pity in her eyes, only a cool, detached assessment. She did not offer him a hand. Get up, she said, her voice even and devoid of warmth. You do not need to beg. She is my patient. I am a doctor first. I save lives. With that, she turned and walked back through the doors, leaving him crumpled on the floor. Her words were not forgiveness. They were a declaration of her own integrity, a power so far beyond his understanding that it left him utterly hollow. As the minutes ticked by, another figure entered the waiting room. Maya. She stood tall in a sharp, professional blazer, her briefcase in one hand. She did not look at Rohan with the clinical detachment of her sister, but with the piercing focus of a prosecutor. The hospital called me as next of kin, she stated, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the silence. She finally let her gaze fall upon him. It was not a look of rage, but of cold, utter contempt. Rohan could only stare, mute. You look surprised to see us here, Maya continued, her tone dangerously calm. Did you think we just vanished? That your violence only had consequences for you? She took a step closer, and though she did not raise her voice, every word felt like a slap. You have no idea what it cost us. The nightmares. The years of therapy. The constant fear that took root in us as children. Her eyes hardened. And you have no idea what it cost our mother. You broke her body, but you never, not for a second, broke her spirit. You just made her stronger than you could ever comprehend." Before Rohan could form a response, the doors to the critical care unit opened again. Priya emerged, followed by a nurse. "She is stabilized," Priya announced, her voice weary but firm. At that moment, Anya and Mr. Sharma arrived, their faces etched with concern for their daughters. Anya's eyes briefly met Rohan's, and he flinched. There was no hatred there, no triumph. There was only a profound, unassailable peace that made his own wretchedness feel absolute. The scene was set. In the bright, impersonal hospital corridor stood the two families. On one side, Anya, poised and dignified, flanked by her two powerful daughters and the kind, solid presence of Mr. Sharma. A unit of love, success, and unshakable strength. On the other side, Rohan, broken and kneeling, and behind him, on a gurney being wheeled out for transfer, a conscious but horrifically weak Devi. Devi's clouded eyes scanned the scene, landing on Anya. A spark of her old malice flickered. Her mouth, slack from the stroke, worked to form words. It was a wet, slurred whisper, but audible to all. "Worthless. Daughters." The insult hung in the air, a final, pathetic puff of poison from a dying viper. It was then that Maya stepped forward. She didn't look at her grandmother with anger, but with the disdain of a scientist examining a failed, archaic experiment. "Your obsession with a son," Maya said, her voice ringing with legal clarity, "blinded you to basic, high school level biology." She paused, ensuring every syllable hit its mark. "The gender of a child is determined by the chromosomes in the asterisk father's asterisk sperm. It is a genetic lottery dictated by the man." She turned her piercing gaze to Rohan, who was staring up at her, his face a mask of dawning horror. "You tortured our mother," Maya stated, each word a hammer blow, "for a biological outcome that was asterisk your asterisk failure. Not hers. The son you craved, the heir you wanted. It was never in her power to give you. It was always, only, in yours." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. Rohan's face crumpled. A low, guttural moan escaped him as the truth, simple and irrefutable, detonated inside him. Every slap, every kick, every lash of the belt, every moment of starvation and degradation, all of it was for a reason that was a lie. The foundation of his entire life, the justification for his cruelty and his weakness, was not just flawed, it was non-existent. He was the failure. He had always been the failure. On the gurney, Devi let out a choked, desperate sound. Her one good eye widened in utter, catastrophic understanding. The very core of her identity, her superiority over her daughter-in-law, her righteous anger, evaporated into nothing, leaving behind the vile, pointless cruelty of her actions. The son she had idolized was the very reason her lineage was ending. The family they had destroyed stood before them, whole and magnificent. And the family they had built was a ruin, founded on a lie, collapsing into dust and regret in the bright, unforgiving light of the hospital corridor. The biological truth, stated with such cool, clinical precision, did not just hang in the air. It became a physical force that ravaged the two people left in its wake. On the gurney, Devi's body went rigid. Her one functioning eye, which had held a lifetime of spite, widened in a paroxysm of pure, undiluted horror. It was not the pain of the heart attack that contorted her features now, but the agony of a paradigm shattering. The very axis of her world, the belief that Anya was a flawed vessel, a curse upon their lineage, snapped. The person she had blamed for every misfortune, the target of all her venom and violence, was innocent. The weight of every whipping, every slur, every act of calculated cruelty crashed down upon her, not as a burden of guilt, but as a monument to her own monstrous ignorance. Her gaze, filled with a desperate, pleading denial, swept over the poised, successful women her granddaughters had become, the very worthless creatures she had despised, who now stood as living, breathing testaments to her own catastrophic folly. And then her eyes fell upon her son. The son she had idolized, for whom she had built this entire edifice of hatred, was the architect of their ruin. The irony was not just bitter, it was annihilating. A single, hot tear of utter shame and devastation welled in her eye, tracing a path through the deep wrinkles on her cheek before she wrenched her head away, unable to bear the sight of the truth any longer. For Rohan, the collapse was total. The moan that escaped him deepened into a raw, guttural sob that seemed to tear itself from the deepest, most broken part of his soul. He did not simply cry, he unraveled. He collapsed into the nearest plastic chair, his body folding in on itself as great, heaving waves of regret racked him. This was not just remorse for the beatings or the neglect. This was the staggering, soul-crushing realization of what he had truly lost. He had possessed a woman of fierce intelligence and unbreakable resilience. He had been given daughters who were not burdens, but potential powerhouses of intellect and compassion. He could have had a life filled with the quiet dignity Anya now embodied, the proud achievements of his daughters, the warmth of a family built on respect. Instead, he had traded it all for a lie. He had sacrificed a family of brilliant, loving women on the altar of a genetic fantasy that was his own failure. His sobs were the sound of that realization, a bottomless, inconsolable grief for the life he had murdered with his own hands. Anya watched them. She saw the tear on Devi's cheek, heard the devastating sobs of the man who was once her husband. But no vengeance warmed her heart. No triumph lit her eyes. Instead, a profound, heartbreaking pity settled over her. They were pitiable creatures, trapped in a hell of their own making, poisoned by a bitterness they had brewed themselves. She had long ago transcended any need for an apology from them. Their regret was their own cross to bear. It had no power over the life she had built. She turned her back on the ruin of her past. She looked at Priya, the lifesaver, and Maya, the truth speaker. She felt the steadying presence of Mr. Sharma beside her. She spoke softly, her voice a calm harbor after a terrible storm. "Let's go home," she said. And they did. They turned and walked away, a united front of love and strength. The mother, the doctor, the lawyer, and the kind man who had offered a hand when all others had dealt blows. They moved down the bright corridor, their figures growing smaller, leaving the darkness behind them. The camera did not follow them. It stayed on the scene in the waiting room. On Rohan, shattered and sobbing in his plastic chair. On Devi, turned to the wall, her body trembling with shame and illness. They were left there, trapped in the sterile, silent hell of their own choices, their legacy one of pain and emptiness, a single, devastating truth echoing in the silence they had created. Outside, the sun was shining. The heavy, automatic doors of the hospital hissed open, and the world outside was drenched in bright, golden sunlight. The transition from the sterile, air-conditioned silence to the warm, vibrant hum of the city was absolute. Anya paused for a moment on the steps, feeling the sun's warmth seep into her skin, a sensation so different from the cold dread that had once been her constant companion. Mr. Sharma was a solid, steady presence beside her, his arm offered not for support, but for partnership. She rested her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the gentle strength there. Priya and Maya fell into step beside them, their shoulders straight, their faces, though etched with the aftermath of the confrontation, were filled with a determined peace. They did not look back. As they walked towards the waiting car, Anya felt it, a final, quiet click deep within her soul. It was not a dramatic feeling, not a surge of joy or a shout of victory. It was a serene, all-encompassing stillness. The ghosts that had whispered in the corners of her mind for years, the echoes of slaps, and the memory of the belt, the chilling fear in her daughter's eyes, they did not vanish, but they lost their power. They became simply memories, part of a story that was now over. The abuse she had endured had been intimate and horrifying, a violation that had sought to erase her spirit. Every blow had been personal, every insult designed to break her. But they had failed, because through every moment of that hell, the core of her being, her maternal love, had remained untainted. Every sacrifice, every endured cruelty, had been a conscious choice made for the two small lives depending on her. That love had been the fuel for her escape and the foundation of her new life. And that new life had been built not on rage, but on the healing balm of respect. Her relationship with Mr. Sharma had never been a fiery, passionate affair. It was something deeper, more enduring. It was the safety of a locked door, the respect in a shared glance, the quiet understanding over a cup of evening tea. He had not sought to own her, but to see her, and in that seeing, he had helped her rediscover herself. Behind her, in the cold light of the hospital, the architects of her old suffering were left to their ruin. Rohan's sobs were not just for the pain he had inflicted, but for the breathtaking family he had willingly destroyed, the brilliant doctor, the fierce lawyer, the resilient creator. He was now the keeper of his mother's bitter, bedridden existence, a life sentence of remorse in a dilapidated house. Devi's single tear was one of utter, catastrophic shame, the devastating understanding that her entire worldview had been a monstrous lie. Their legacy was one of pain and emptiness. Anya's legacy was walking beside her, strong and free. A slight, serene smile touched her lips as she stepped into the sunlight. It was not a smile of triumph over them, but of profound gratitude for her own journey. She had been a victim, a survivor, and now she was simply free. Finally, completely, and forever free. The phoenix had not just risen, she had soared, and the sky was now her home.